Welcome back, everybody, to the CogniFit podcast. Today, I'm going to be interviewing Amina Zamani, who's an executive coach and speaker who utilizes neuroscience, biohacking, and wellness to guide individuals and teams to achieve peak performance. I'm really excited to host a conversation with her today, as we'll be discussing limiting belief patterns and the power of vulnerability when it comes to self-healing. So, Amina, it's great to have you with us today. Thank you so
Yeah,
much.
I'm so happy to be here.
Where are you from? Where are you based right now? Where are you calling
I'm
in?
currently in LA.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, it's across the Atlantic. So
It
to
is.
start this conversation, Amina, considering I've been looking at the different themes you've been touching on for quite a while now, ever since I got introduced to your profile, I'd like to start with how you define limiting beliefs, what they are, and why they show up.
Yeah, sure. So my work is all about helping executives, founders, really for the last 16 years, get to root cause analysis and get to the core of their limitations. And so I work a lot with them on peak performance. And the idea of peak performance is really understanding, like, where are you? Where do you want to be? And what's preventing you from being at your peak, like falling into flow, like achieving that which you desire. And so oftentimes, if people know what they want and they know how to get there, but something's stopping them, it could be a limiting belief. And so a limiting belief is just a belief you have about yourself, about the world, about possibilities that may not match reality.
Mm,
So it's just my passion, actually, helping someone discover what that core limitation is, right? Because once you get to the core limitation and you transform it, like the world opens up, perception opens up, possibilities open up. It's beautiful.
yeah. And I think it kind of allows us to differentiate between the false self and the true self whenever we're kind of getting
Yeah,
stuck in the mind. Which leads me
exactly.
to my next question as well, because I'd love to understand from a neuroscience perspective, like what's actually happening in the brain when we're stuck in our limiting belief patterns from your perspective.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, gosh, it's such a complex thing because in my opinion, and there's so much research out there, like oftentimes we can create, we might have a trauma in our lives. We might have a difficulty in our lives. And if it's very difficult and if it's very traumatic, it can get stuck really in your amygdala, this little almond shaped, in the back, kind of
Hmm.
like right here. And the amygdala stores away all of our subconscious difficulties, our fears, our anxieties, and limiting beliefs and deep traumas can get in there. And so sometimes when something's very painful, we may not even remember it. Our amygdala, it's like, imagine, I mean, this is just my own interpretation. It's like a big, long tunnel of trash, right? Not that our mindset is trash, but we just have so much conflicts and things happening. And if it's very painful, our brains will shut the lid on that trash can, on that can.
Hmm.
And so it can leak out and it can impact our performance. It can impact our day-to-day life, and we don't know exactly what it is. And so a limitation, we all have them, right? So like I'll give you a story. I um met and worked with a founder who had this really profound belief that in order to be successful, they had to grind really hard. And they got to a point where they started having a family and having more, wanting more balance in their life. But the belief was that unless I work, 16 hours, unless I grind, I can't achieve that level of success. Now, that's not fundamentally true because there are people in the world, for example, that maybe work 8 hours, 10 hours, whatever, and can achieve that success. And maybe they believe something else. And he grew up in an environment where unless he, kicked it, like threw it out of the ballpark, it wasn't acknowledged. So his association to like success was really love, right? Like getting that validation, getting that love. So he got that indoctrination at such a young age, and that perpetuated. And the more successful he got, everybody would praise him. So his whole identity, his whole belief structure, his entire neurological wiring was set that he had to just put more and more and more effort. And when he came to me and said, hey, I would love to find some balance, I just don't know that it's possible. I don't believe that it's possible. And when he's able to change that belief that he's lovable as he is, it was unbelievable how much he was able to shift his life and delegate and not have to do everything himself and still feel successful. And the redefinition of success was critical. It wasn't knocking it out of the ballpark. It was, hey, as long as I'm in integrity and living my values, I'm successful. I mean, that's a very different experience than it's all up to me and I have to, the only way I can succeed is if I do X, Y, Z. So changing a belief system requires you understanding it, understanding where the pressure is, what the root of it is. And then systematically being able to, use a coach or a therapist or do some exercises yourself to shift that. The Course in Miracles says that a miracle is a change in perception. So if you look at, the wiring of your brain and you have a limiting belief, I mean, this isn't actually the case, but it's like figuratively, it's like wires have been crossed. Right. So the electricity of your brain, like the, like magnetic piece, like say it's like firing together with that limitation. When you have a change in perspective, it's almost like your wires get uncrossed. And then you have all this pathway, all this blood flow, all this opening.
Yeah, the neuroplasticity just kind of reworks itself once we make new choices, 100%. And it's interesting because in that example, I guess like it all came from external validation, right? Like, and also kind of a new association beyond it being like a state of being. And I feel like that's something that's very, very much like conditioned by the matrix, that we live in, by like how people value the way that they perform through the definition of success. And I think that's something a lot of people will be able to relate to because it's such a common misunderstanding when it comes to external influences versus like our internal worth and that story that we create with our narratives.
Yeah.
So thank you very much for sharing that example. I think it's powerful. And I also, because I guess when it comes to limiting beliefs as well with the brain, what do you think, how do thoughts influence our nervous system? Because a lot of people talk about how thoughts influence our emotions, but I'd love to go deeper on like the nervous system effect when it comes to our thought patterns and those circuits that you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, it's so funny, like my friend Ellen Vora actually wrote this beautiful book called The Anatomy of Anxiety, right? Just distilling the mind body effects of what anxiety can do. Like metaphysics tells us that anytime we have a pain in our body, it's your brain's way, it's your mind's way of communicating to you. So for example, according to metaphysics, if Louise Hay has this entire book around if your knee hurts, you might have a fear of moving forward. If your throat hurts, you might have fear of communicating. Now, that's not directly embedded in science, but there are somatic influences that can occur in the body through our thought process. So, for example, just neurologically, when we get really, really stressed out, we have like heaps of cortisol running through our body, right? Like, and so what occurs is when we get really stressed, often people call it a trigger. And what can occur when we get really triggered is we may have a flashback that we're not aware of a trauma. Our values may be questioned in some way, or not questioned, violated. Right? I have a value of justice and this person tried to rip me off and I'm triggered. And so when that trigger happens, you have these neurochemicals, the main one, cortisol, stress hormone running through your body, then your prefrontal cortex actually shrinks. Prefrontal cortex is your logic center. So now we have a stream of these neurochemicals running through our body, causing us stress, signaling fight, flight, freeze. I'm not able to think rationally. And then all of a sudden my stomach hurts. And then all of a sudden, I start feeling a lot of pressure in my neck. I'll give you an example. Yesterday, I had this is a personal example. I mean, it's not the end of the world, but I had a, very busy day. I've been working on some sort of, time sensitive projects, and a lot like this one person that I was working with was messaging me nonstop in between my meetings. And so that created a rush of cortisol because I was like, I'm here on a meeting, like I'm going back to back from meetings. And it's about energy management when you coach people. It's about energy management when you're like fully there for somebody. So I'm 100% present. Then I'm getting these pings, right? And all of a sudden, this person says something to me that violated my value of justice and respect. So all of a sudden I'm frustrated, I'm irritated, and I'm now, my values are being violated. So I'm like feeling triggered. And I noticed immediately that my neck and shoulders started to get a little, I got a little tense. And I thought, oh, this is just a somatic response to stress. And so immediately turn, like talked myself back to, okay, where are you? What do you need? Like shifting that neural pathway, like, like what do you need? What do you want right now? We're going to put this aside. And just that little conversation with myself prevented me from just like having additional pain. And I felt fine. And it's like such a small example, right? But we don't make the connection that I'm having this stress that, I mean, people aren't aware on a daily basis, or I mean, some might not be. I mean, I'm sure there are many that are, but we don't go on in our day as human beings thinking, oh, there was my value violated. Oh, now I have a somatic trigger, right? We're just responding and reacting to the world.
Unconsciously, yeah, most of the time.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And so to just name it and recognize it can take it away from us in a way, because you're like, oh, I don't need to go there.
Yeah. And I guess also it kind of gives you the sense when you have that awareness, it gives you that sense of like, this is something that I can change when I
Yeah.
understand how certain things are making my body respond in this way. And I
Right.
think that's where like the ultimate power lies when we're
Yeah.
able to tune in on that level, which obviously just
Right.
takes awareness and training.
Yeah. Yeah, no, exactly. Exactly. The faster we can get to what the root is, the faster we can actually change it. A lot of times people say, time heals all wounds. And I think that that's a really very valid response. And with trauma or with deep incongruities, time can actually solidify the actual pain or the limitation more. It can also cement it.
Yeah, I've
So,
always had an issue with that, like
yeah,
saying for that reason, because it's like how you use your time in your healing process that
right.
allows you to compete, like transcend that pain. So
All right.
that's always been something that, because like I think it's a condition in itself to think
Yeah,
time will be the healer, but it's like, how are you using that time effectively to heal your nervous system response, your
yeah,
subconscious triggers, the ancestral the
yeah,
influences, all the narratives that you might be holding on to that don't belong to you. And that's where I feel like that we can redirect, a lot of the focus for when it comes to that
yeah.
concept. But sorry for cutting you off. What were you going to say regarding that?
Oh, I don't know. I don't even know that you cut me off. I think that's great. I agree with you.
Yeah, because it was going, I guess, because it's interesting to see that when we think about time and we think about vulnerability as well,
Oh, right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
you know,
yeah. So
we think
that's
of,
what it was.
yeah, letting vulnerability be the guide within the pain triggers.
Yeah.
How do you think vulnerability becomes the ultimate healer when we're in
Yeah.
that state of like I'm now prioritizing
Yeah.
my
No, it's a totally good question, right? Because I like Googled and like researched just like what is the dictionary version of vulnerability? We all have our own understanding. And when I looked it up, it was so funny. It was like, the definition of vulnerability is being under attack and risk. And like think about that from a psychological perspective. Like who wants to be vulnerable if we're going to be attacked and at risk? Nobody wants that, right? So even the idea of being vulnerable can bring up that stress hormone in our body. But what the most amazing thing is to be, is so profound, so simple, is that when we are vulnerable and we are received for our vulnerability, we produce oxytocin. the
Mhm.
love chemical. And you can produce all these happy chemicals, right? Like happiness is, I talk about this all the time. Happiness is a conglomeration of chemicals of like dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin. And so great. They're like the gain is so much better than the risk and the fear. But we just have to be aware of who you can actually be vulnerable with. And I think a lot of times for me, for a long time, I didn't know where to be vulnerable because I used to mistake victimhood for vulnerability.
Mm.
You know, I'd be like, well, you did this to me and that made me feel bad. And I thought that was vulnerability. And it's not. You saying, right, vulnerability is, wow, I felt so ashamed and small when you said that to me.
Yeah.
And I know you didn't mean it, but it just triggered this idea that I'm not good enough. You know, and the story I told myself is that I'm useless and I don't measure up or whatever, you know, like something along that talk track is really getting to the truth. But we have to know that that's how we were feeling.
Yeah. And I guess like the same way we talked about like how you define success, I think a lot of people have different definitions of what vulnerability looks like. Or would you say it's more about what it feels like? Because I'm someone too, for example, that I consider myself selectively vulnerable because I
Yeah.
choose who I allow myself to be vulnerable with, which I think doesn't always mean that I'm like surrendering fully into how I can connect
Yeah.
when I'm allowing myself to be vulnerable. But I guess it's also not necessarily about like it's a state of being that obviously we show up with in different scenarios in different
Yeah.
contexts with different people. But I sometimes notice what blocks me personally is I get selective over who I feel I can genuinely be vulnerable with as a
And that's truth.
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, you know, somebody else asked me this the other day. Well, like, does that mean I have to be vulnerable with everybody? And like, what if I don't feel safe being vulnerable at work? You know, we have inner circles and outer circles of people. And for us as human beings, as animals of these sapiens to function and continue to have high levels of energy, we certainly need community. We certainly need emotional connection. And oftentimes it's it varies for who you can have that deep emotional connection with. It doesn't have to be a family member. It could be a friend. It could be a therapist. Just a few people in our lives that we know that we can say our deepest things to.
Mm.
And, you know, we're really only as sick as our secrets, sickness meaning our emotional well-being, right? Like, so the more we hide, the harder it is to be vulnerable because shame is connected to why we are not vulnerable. That's what Brene Brown says, right? The more shame we have, the harder it is to be vulnerable.
Mhm.
And so to be with people in your inner circle that can receive your vulnerability, then you don't need to open yourself up in the outer circle. We need to understand stages of intimacy.
Yeah.
And to have somebody out here that can't hold your vulnerability, that might ridicule your vulnerability or gaslight your vulnerability, like, oh, you're just too sensitive. That's actually not somebody that can hold one's vulnerability. Somebody saying, wow, I really hear you. I'm so sorry you felt that way.
Yeah.
You know, like, tell me more.
I guess it's also intuitive as well, when you have these moments that like emotionally you're feeling this desire to just share and express. And I certainly think there's this like energy that serves that ability as well to like bring that out, the
Yeah.
invitation that comes with the vulnerable piece.
Yeah.
And what advice would you give to people who struggle with embracing like vulnerability fully, who might not even have the ability to have that inner circle?
Yeah. Yeah. That's very true. Yeah. I mean, Frank Sinatra said, "Right, if you have 5 people in your life that are really close to you, you're a very rich person." And I was like, wow, that's so beautiful. Because you're right. Some of us may not have the community, or we may have the community, but not feel safe. And so I would say what I tell people is journaling, because then it's you and you. And there's such a beautiful, cognitive release that one can have through journaling, and to practice that vulnerability on pen to paper. And there's research, and the Artist's Way talks about this idea of waking up in the morning and doing your morning pages, doing 2 pages of that. And I just think that it's such a powerful, free, simple way to become more intimate with yourself. Sometimes I talk to myself and I say, just like yesterday, like, I didn't always have moments in my life where I was feeling really vulnerable when I was young, and my mother or parents or family members would say, "Oh, sweetheart, how are you feeling? What do you need? Oh, sounds like you're really sad right now." It was just like, okay, move on. Here we go.
I had
Like,
that too. I had a
don't
Latina
worry
mother.
about that. Yeah, don't cry, don't
Yeah.
be so sensitive, right? So we get all these messages and then we feel ashamed. So I have this emotion, and the message I'm getting from an adult when I'm young is that, don't have that emotion. So then we feel ashamed. Why do we feel ashamed? Because they're saying it's not right, but I feel it. And so then hide it. Don't show it.
Yeah.
And so the power of freeing yourself from the shame is so profound. And think about it, if that accesses additional happy chemicals, then this is my personal opinion, to the degree that we can access our vulnerability and our emotion is the degree that we can access our joy. The more we numb our difficult emotions, the harder it is to feel something on the other side. That's why I think breath work is so unbelievable, because it just like plucks you out of, your conscious brain.
Yeah.
It becomes somatic, right? Your body thinks it's hyperventilating, so it just like releases all of this stress, all of this trauma. I mean, I think, and again, Wim Hof's breath work on YouTube, 11 minutes. It's all we need. It's like those are like 2 free mechanisms that can profoundly change someone's relationship to vulnerability and themselves and produce happier neurochemicals.
Beautiful. Is that would you say that Wim Hof's 11 minutes is your go-to?
Yeah, actually. There's like a lot of breathwork people out there, and I'm
Yeah, a
sure they're
lot. And a lot of
amazing.
fusions now related
Yeah,
to it. So
totally.
I always get a bit like lost in the breathwork world now because I'm just seeing so many different varieties.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, none of it's wrong, right?
Yeah.
It's like, people say this about pizza. It's like you can't really screw up a pizza. Even if it's bad pizza, it'll still be pizza. It's like bread and cheese. And it's like kind of that way about breath work, or like, you can't mess it up. But I like Wim because I think that he's a proven person that has brought it to mainstream society, and there's no fusion. It's just the belly, chest breathing. And I like his voice. It's just
Yeah.
funny.
It's funny.
So
He has
I
like a
just do
very,
that.
very little cartoon. I feel like he's like a little Flintstone that's come out and he's like, I'm
I know.
here to help you heal.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Amina, for sharing your
Oh,
knowledge and your wisdom on all of this, on our limiting belief systems,
oh
on
my God.
the power of vulnerability. I really, really enjoyed having this conversation with you.